You can now hear Movie Heaven, Movie Hell on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. Listen anytime, anywhere. Stitcher is an award-winning free app that lets you listen to all your favourite shows, plus discover from 20,000 news, entertainment and sports shows. You can also create your own custom playlists. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad and in over 4 million car dashboards. It's on demand and it's on the go. No downloading, no syncing, no wasted memory. You can stream your favourite podcasts from Stitcher. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And please leave us a review and rating on Stitcher. Thank you. Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aitken, and
I'm Keith Eyles, and we are both independent filmmakers that like talking about other filmmakers' work and related film topics. And for this extra, we're very lucky to have a special guest with us today.
We do. We have Edward Ross, the author of the graphic novel Filmish. So welcome to the podcast, Edward.
Thank you.
I just to sort of kick things off here, for people who don't sort of know this, first of all, I have to give a shout out because I bought this a couple of days ago, your graphic novel, Filmish, A Graphic Journey Through Film. I bought it from my good friend Paul at Orbital Comics in London. That's orbitalcomics.com. And I promised, they gave me a little bit of a discount. So I promised I'd mention them on the podcast, which I've done. But I have to say, I haven't been able to put this down. This really is like a global history of cinema. It sort of covers 120 years in 175 pages. It's everything from the Lumiere brothers and Edison right up to contemporary films. But much more than that, it tends to deal with film theory, narrative, genre, social relevance, and it's just an excellent, I mean, I used to teach film, and this would be an excellent film studies tool for any film students out there. So congratulations. You know, I have to admit, this is not only well drawn, but the whole structure of it is absolutely fascinating. So, you know, that's my sycophantic bit over. But, you know, I just wanted to say that this I didn't know anything about this until Simon organized for you to come on the show, and I bought it, and it really is quite intriguing.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
So tell us more.
Well, where did the idea for doing the graphic novel come from?
It kind of, I don't know, it just kind of landed in my lap, or it kind of appeared out of nowhere. So when I came out of uni, I studied film at uni. I don't know if you can tell. I studied, I did film theory at uni, and I kind of grew up wanting to be a filmmaker, actually. And I went to uni, studied film, and came out of uni, started to work on my first short film script, and sort of having this kind of vague notion of what to do next. And at that time, sort of simultaneously, I started getting really interested in comics again. Like I'd been reading them again, so I read them in childhood, and I was reading them again since meeting my partner, who introduced me to, when I was 16, she sort of reintroduced me to comics and introduced me to grown-up comics. And so I'd been reading them again, and I was getting interested in making them. So out of uni, I kind of had these two things going on. I was trying to write this short film script, and I also started getting sort of much more interested in writing comics. And this kind of really became very evident to me quite quickly that for all the lack of enthusiasm I had for writing this short film script, I had, you know, all this enthusiasm for writing comics, and I kind of started to just sort of slip away from filmmaking into comics. So about that time, I started sort of messing around drawing comics, just sort of starting to find my feet. And I was working at the Edinburgh Film House at the time, and the marketing manager there sort of saw that I was doing comics, and thought that it'd be interesting to have some sort of comics thing done for the members newsletter. So that was kind of when I came up with the idea for Filmish. I took some of the research I'd done at uni for my dissertation on food and, well, I did my dissertation on food and horror in Far East Asian cinema, which is a fantastic topic, actually. And I sort of translated that into a short comic for the newsletter. So that was where Filmish came from, was a growing disinterest in making films, but I had always had this real passion for analyzing film and looking at films and kind of better understanding films. And just my growing love of comics sort of by accident led to this amalgamation of the two forms.
Well, one thing I love about the graphic novel is that you delve into certain films in each chapter, and you give them like 2 or 3 pages. So how did you decide which films to do that to expand upon and put in those chapters?
So each chapter is based on a different theme that I think is going to be interesting. So in the book, we've got the eye, the body, sets and architecture, and so forth. So each chapter, that's kind of the starting point, is finding a topic that I think is going to be a really interesting way to look at film in a different way. That was kind of, when I was studying film at uni, that was always what interested me most. It was less the kind of auteur theory stuff or the industry stuff, and more the weird themes and stuff. So I enjoyed doing a course on movie music, for example, because it was something that I really never thought about until I studied it. So with Filmish, that's what I do, is I take a topic that I think is going to be interesting. So sets and architecture was one that kind of inspired me early on, back when I was self-publishing Filmish before the book. That's the starting point. So you start with this idea, and it's like, how do films use architecture, use the set design to convey parts of the story and to tell us more about the characters, to tell us more about the world, and to also sort of harbor meaning for the film. And from there, I kind of try and find films that fit, and that involves doing a lot of research and reading and watching. And then obviously my eye is drawn towards the films that I love the most. So in terms of the sets and architecture one, the big one actually in that for me is Die Hard, which was a film that I grew up, from probably too young an age, really enjoying. That was kind of my when I was off sick at school, my day off film would be I'd put the VHS of Die Hard in and watch that while I was sort of curled up sick in bed. So it was kind of like my day off film. So I watched that quite, a fair bit whenever I had the day off. But so that was a movie that I thought of as this great action movie, really entertaining. And then I read this article on it by a blogger who and author who writes about architecture called Chef Mana. He wrote this blog, building blog, and he wrote about the idea that Die Hard is the best architectural film from the last 25 years. The idea being that in the film, John McClane uses the Nakatomi Plaza, which is this quite dull corporate space, but he uses it in every sort of conceivable way he can, as a weapon and as a shield and as a hiding place. And he goes into the infrastructure of the building. So he traverses the building in any which way but going like up the stairs and through the lifts and down the corridors. And so he explores the space, and he transforms the space in the process. And so that kind of blew my mind in terms of thinking about this film that, is a great classic action movie, but actually it's got a lot more going on in it. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with Filmish. I want to take movies that actually you've maybe seen a lot of times, you've seen a few times, and just give you a new way to look at them, to give you a chance to watch them again with a new outlook on them and to illuminate them in a different way. So that's ultimately how I choose the films, is I kind of want to try and balance films that I have seen before and that I love and that I now have a new insight on because of my reading. And then also help introduce people to new films they might have not seen before. So it's kind of a balancing act between the two.
Well, yeah, I love the bit you did about Pontypool, because I know that's a film that not many people have seen, but it is a really great film because of its use of language.
Mm-hmm.
and sort of doing a zombie film in a very different and original way. So I love that you actually explored that film, because
Yeah,
not many people talk about it.
I know
Yeah.
it's definitely due a lot more attention. I think it's a fantastic movie. That was actually pretty much, that was like on the list for a long time. I need to write about this film, and almost shaped the content of the book, in a sense. Like I wanted to feature that so much that I needed to find a way to get it in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you've done, I mean, what is really, again, quite fascinating about this whole thing is obviously film, as we find with doing these podcasts, it is such a massive topic. Even though there's only about 120 years of history or whatever, it's such a massive topic. And you have managed to, I mean, it's very broad in here. You've managed to, reference and cover so many films from history and different cultures and everything. But what I particularly like about it, I mean, I'm talking about the content and the structure, but obviously the artwork itself is still really good. You've captured those characters in those films. But what I love is, much as somebody would sort of narrate a documentary, if they were making a documentary about this, you've actually kind of put yourself in it and take us on this journey. And I really like that. I love the fact that you've included yourself as a sort of caricature in it as well. So
egotistical.
Well, it's your art, isn't it? You've got to put yourself in there.
Like, I think, like, I never wanted to suggest that, like, I'm a film expert, that I know everything. And everything that's in there has been because I've spent ages researching it, but it is kind of like, in a sense, it is autobiographical. It is my passions for film, my interests in film, and the films I've chosen. So I think it's kind of good to acknowledge it's definitely not meant to be a complete history. And it kind of very deliberately, although the book starts at the beginning of cinema and it kind of ends now, like it ends with a kind of look forward into the future of what cinema is. I never wanted it to be a sort of chronological history. And so I never wanted to, I didn't feel like it needed to be a complete history of cinema. I wanted to explore these different angles and to compare films from maybe vastly different eras.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it's kind of appropriate that I'm in there, because it isn't meant to be a sort of an objective history, No,
absolutely. It's very personal. I mean, I read your little forward at the beginning as well, and it seems like you had a very similar sort of thing to myself in Simon, where you sort of grew up watching VHSs of all these things, as well as going to the cinema. And I like the fact that you've sort of highlighted that film isn't just about entertainment and escapism, but it's about so many other things. And yes, you've absolutely made it personal, but at the same time, for anyone out there that is sort of studying film theories in general, this I would say would be quite an easy way for them to get up to speed, as it were, because obviously it's a very easy read, but it is all there. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to provide that. I wanted to be able to introduce these ideas that I think are really important and really interesting, in a way that's accessible. Like I think film theory can kind of get bogged down in the sort of academic side of things. But I always find I found the theory interesting. I often find the theory more interesting necessarily than the context it was taught in. I felt that there was weight to it that could be, brought out, that we could enjoy it almost. I kind of think film theory can be a form of entertainment in itself, if done correctly. I wanted to, in the book, sort of remove that kind of academic context as much as possible, or the academic language, so that anyone could really read it and understand it. You might not, as a result of the book, know the name of the theory necessarily. Like you might read about a theory without it necessarily being sort of so that you will now know that it is this theory, and when you read about that theory in future, you'll know what that is. But I'm trying to give an overview of these ideas and sort of spark off those ideas for people who might not have heard them before.
So, what did you think of Room? Is it, oh God,
Room
217?
237. Yeah. Well, I kind of featured a bit of that, a bit of what they feature in that film. I featured the Rob Agger's theory on The Shining. So Room 237 is the film that is a collection of fan theories bordering on conspiracy theories about the film, or not even bordering on conspiracy theories about The Shining. So in that film, they've got the idea that Stanley Kubrick hid a secret message that he had faked the moon landings, and the idea that he hid that in The Shining. So that's one of the theories they cover in Room 237. But there's this other one, Rob Agger, and I feature him in the book. He talked about how the architecture of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining is sort of impossible. It's an impossible architecture because you have all these spaces that don't really line up logically, and also so generally speaking, when you watch the film, you're not really sure where everything is in relation to each other. And when you analyze the film, as he has done, like watching it again and again obsessively, you see that you have all these spaces that kind of overlap in impossible ways. Now, most people possibly argue that that's because it's a set and they had to build it that way for practical reasons, which is true, partly true, certainly. But at the same time, and as he argues, Stanley Kubrick was obsessive about detail and attention to detail and perfection, and that there would be no accidents in his films. And so he argues that as a result, and possibly deliberately, The Shining creates this deliberately impossible architecture that kind of loses you within it. So when you're watching it, you have this uncanny sense that the space is wrong. So I kind of included that in the architecture chapter because I thought it was a really interesting point, and whether it's deliberate or not, I think is true, that when you watch The Shining, that you're lost in the building, and that it does feel kind of wrong when you watch it. You really don't know where things are, and it's a building that feels kind of almost fluid in its layout.
I mean, there's lots of images in The Shining about labyrinths, and there's a maze, and also the fact that Kubrick, one of his production companies was called Minotaur, and of course the Minotaur was always in the center of the maze and everything. So it kind of rings true, the whole it sort of being maybe like a maze like, but I don't know to what extent he had that in mind. It's funny watching that film because as a filmmaker, you always hear weird and wonderful theories about your film, and at the time of making it, you never thought of these things. I mean, I had one about my first short film, Firepower, where a guy said it's all about suicide, when I'm like, well, okay, but that's not what I was thinking about when I made the film, or what the point I was making, but that's what he saw. And especially with that film, it did seem to be that a lot of people were putting their own spin on the film.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just think Room 237, it's that thing. So some of those theories I think are absolutely fascinating, and may have some element of reality to the theory, but some of them are just so far out that I think, I don't know.
I think something that I sort of learned making Filmish, or maybe I learned this wrongly, because as you say, like, people find things in your work that isn't there. But one thing that I kind of learned is that in one sense there are no accidents when you're making something, in the sense that every single thing you do, someone has to make a decision on. So in the sense of like The Shining, someone had to draw up plans, because that was a set that was built. So it wasn't a pre-existing building, it was a set that was built. So someone had to have planned all those elements, all those impossibilities were planned into the building. Now, whether or not that was deliberate or not, is another question, in the sense of whether it's deliberate that they hope that would show up on screen or not is a question. But one thing that people say is it's just a film, it was just an accident. But I don't think that there are accidents, in the sense that someone has to go and choose the costume, someone has to go and build the set, choose the camera angles, edit it, and so forth. So throughout all that process, all these things are decisions that are made that impact on the final piece. But that said, people will interpret things that aren't necessarily deliberate on your part. And I think that's actually one of the kind of key themes of Filmish, is that's kind of part of the fun of watching things, and that it's important to, like I kind of, in the book, I argue against sort of auteur theory, that the authors, first of all, that the director is the author and the only constructor of meaning for the film, and also that meaning is the only valid meaning. I think it's really powerful that people are able to watch or consume a piece of art and interpret it the way they want to. I think there are kind of maybe more valid or justifiable interpretations than others, but I think it's really important that we don't disavow people's interpretations because they're not the filmmaker,
Yeah.
Oh no, that's half the fun of watching a film, especially one that leaves itself open to interpretation. It's I watched Under the Skin recently, which is a film that completely leaves itself open to interpretation. I've heard theories outside of it being an alien, that one theory I heard that she's actually a rape victim, and this is all happening in her mind. So yeah, that is one of the joys of film.
No, I agree entirely as well with all of this. I mean, this is one of the reasons I kind of wish, winding back a couple of years, that I had this graphic novel, when I was teaching film, because one of the things I used to, when we looked at film theory and structures, and we talked about things like auteur theory versus collaboration, etc., and how ambiguous film is or can be. We talk very much about how film is different from real life, even if it's a contemporary, realistic, like kitchen sink drama or whatever, and how everything in film, everything is there for a reason, as opposed to, in life, sometimes stuff is just there,
Mm-hmm.
and how you select everything from, a prop on the table to what the character is wearing. It's all, the thought goes into that, and then that obviously feeds into other theories like mise en scene and things of that nature. So I think the whole thing is fascinating, really. Hence why, I mean, this is, you've put in this novel, in this graphic novel, essentially what I've spent my entire life thinking about. It's sort of condensed into this. So it's really good. The other thing I like that you've done in this as well is the fact that if anybody did want to delve deeper than what you've actually got on the page, it's really well referenced. I love the fact that you've got a whole sort of glossary at the back with references to those films and those quotes and things of that nature. So again, if somebody wanted to use this as a basis and then go study more, which, let's be honest, that's what film is. It's all about that onion, that you're constantly peeling away and looking at more things into it, then they've got a piece of reference material at the back that they can use as well. So that must have taken quite a long time to compile, I would have thought.
What, the references?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was fairly systematic in the process, but I got to the end and I was like, I have these a bit of space at the back, and at first it was just going to be, the references, like the books that I'd referenced, and I was like, oh, but I should probably like point out all the films I've referenced, which turned out to be 300 films. That's including like the panels where I've got like maybe a prop from another film or something hiding in the background. And then I was like, okay, but also I'll use this space to expand on things, because I guess one of the things about comics is that you've got a relatively limited space to work with. I could never go into immense detail in the way that you could with prose. But but at the same time, you've got the benefit of having like drawings to help sort of tell the story. So where in a piece of prose you might have to actually describe the scene in Blade Runner or whatever that you're talking about and describe the background, in a comic you can just draw it. But I wanted in the back to have a bit more information. There's sometimes moments where I'd maybe chosen one side of the argument but not covered the other side of the argument, to be able to kind of give people the idea that it's not just a sort of, it's not just that this is the answer, that maybe there's a sort of, it's contested or something, maybe some ideas are contested, or there's further reading that you could do to kind of see the other side of things. It was important that people could have that access point. It's definitely not the the only thing you should read on film theory, and if you want to learn more, it'd be good to be able to know where to start.
Yeah. The other nice thing you've done in some of these panels as well is the amount of, not only have you sort of created a panel, from a still from the film, but you've also in some cases put like loads of other references and Easter eggs and those sort of things in there. I mean, I particularly like the one where you're talking a little bit about social decline and video nasties, and you've got the whole video library. And if you start like reading some of the names of the sides of the videos and some of the posters and things like that, you've got that throughout. So yes, it's great. I love all that stuff.
Yeah, I can't remember if I succeeded, but my intention there was to feature like all of the 72 video nasties that were banned in the UK. I don't know if I'll have to count them up. I don't know if I can.
Was there anything that didn't make the graphic novel?
Yes.
Let me say the special edition's due out next year, right?
Not quite. There's definitely films that I would love to cover, filmmakers and films I'd love to cover at some point that didn't make it, just because it wasn't like appropriate to the topic, or because I had to choose, one not the other. So like one of my favorite all-time films is the thing, the John Carpenter one. And I would have loved to have covered that. I would have loved to have drawn some stuff from that. That would have been really, really fun. But I just didn't make the cut. I guess in the end I chose, when I was doing body horror, I chose The Fly over The Thing, which are two films that kind of compete in my affections.
Yeah. We mentioned The Thing a few times on this podcast. Yes,
we do. Yes,
that's good. So good.
I think it's got its own episode.
Yeah, so like that, and then I'm a big fan of like Werner Herzog. His films almost defy analysis. I'm not sure. I think, and also I feel like if I ever bumped into him and I'd analyze his films, he probably wouldn't. I get the impression he doesn't really think too highly of film theorists. So
he'd scare you.
Yeah, so there's certainly, I mean, there's loads more to cover. I've got a list of chapters I'd like to do in the future. So if I get the chance to do another volume, I've already got ideas for that, and there's loads to cover, because I never went down the route of doing a chronological history. And just so, because you're just choosing these topics that are sort of self-contained, you could go on forever, essentially. I mean, you might start repeating yourself and covering the same films again and again, but there's so many different ways to look at film. Like I think I like to think of it as you're just kind of taking a different angle on things. So there's just endless ground to cover, really.
Well, I do love the fact that you jump around in time and genre and stuff, because I don't know if you saw like the history of film that Mark Cousins did, but that was because he did that in chronological order. It did take a while to sort of get into it.
Yeah.
If you've seen it, I mean,
that's the story of film, isn't it?
Yeah, story of film.
Yeah.
Because he does start from the very beginning and then works his way through the century.
I think that's a a really, like, I think if you're doing a sort of an authoritative piece, and I think that story film is it wants to be not necessarily covering everything, but to be a very full piece on film. I think, you do need to tell the history, but for me, that's never been how I've watched film. I've never really done that. I've maybe been in the mood to watch a bunch of disaster movies and watch a few of those, or body horror movies and watch a few of those. Like, you consume across, I consume film across time, not necessarily focusing on one era or one moment in cinema, but sort of drawing on different times and so forth. So it always felt natural for me to go that way. I should say Mark Cousins was like a huge influence on me. Like, I think he was the first film, the first voice on film that I heard in that way, because he did the Movies Rome introductions. So on those VHSs that I had taped off the TV, you'd have him at the start, kind of introducing.
Oh, so you missed the Alex Cooke era then?
Yeah.
You're a bit young for that, yeah. We're old gits, Simon.
I mean, I feel old just talking about VHS.
We always we've got a whole episode on VHS. We have very fond memories. Yes.
Yeah, there was something about that. That I think that's I mention it in the introduction, and I mention it when I'm talking about it, because I mean, maybe it probably won't mean anything to those who haven't had that experience of watching on VHS, but it's just something that just really defines my experience of those films. So not only are we talking about them on VHS, but for me, we're talking about them on VHS tapes off the TV. So for years, my experience of The Shining was tapes off the TV with like the Stella Artois advert break and the adverts.
Yes, I remember those.
Yeah. Me too.
It's like that is kind of just lingering there in my subconscious. That is still part of The Shining, is that kind of, and the late night adverts and stuff like that.
Well, I can always remember the commercial breaks from Star Wars when it used to be on ITV.
Oh yeah. So I think that's kind of part of it, and I think that's an interesting element of how we can consume film. I mean, that's kind of going away now, but that's for like a few, for a generation of people. That's a kind of part of it. That was part, the whole part of the experience was slipping the VHS tape and it getting kind of sucked in, and the tracking signal, and then
yeah. But they got it so easy now, because at the weekend I watched all of this is very sad, but I watched the entire series of Jessica Jones and Daredevil season 2 on Netflix, right? And I Chromecast it to my big screen TV, and it's brilliant because you literally don't have to do anything. If you want to watch the next episode, it jumps right in, and on Jessica Jones, because Jessica Jones doesn't have a pre-credits bit, it has the credits and then straight into the story. It even jumps through that, so you don't have to fast forward through anything, and it just does it all for you. And I think to myself, oh my god, I remember having to sort of get up and put the tape in and fast forward to the bit and get the tracking right and all of that sort of stuff. And now it's HD perfect, just like that, easy. So yes, times have changed. And I like the fact that you do end leading back to your the graphic novel. That's what we're here to talk about. But I do like the way that you kind of end with the talking about technology and how not just technology in films, but actual technology in filmmaking and cinema as well, and how that's evolving. I think that's a really good note, to end your graphic novel on. So,
I mean,
it's part of it.
Like I say at the end of the book, who was it again? I can't remember. But that that cinema, the idea that cinema hasn't been invented yet. Actually, just looking up now. Andre Bazin, so the idea that he said that the cinema hasn't been invented yet, that as a medium it's always changing, and that the first people the first inventors of cinema didn't, they hadn't planned for this sort of really cool, moody, black and white footage. That wasn't what they were going for. They wanted full color, 3D surround sound, VR, or whatever. Like they were kind of those initial forays into film was the hope that one day they could capture reality in some way, and that's the not that that's necessarily that's not to disavow these other moments in its history, but that film is always going to evolve. The concept of the moving image has sort of long been striving to capture more and more fidelity to reality, and has evolved in other ways as well. And I think it's I think it is sad that when we lose touch with our film history, but also I think it's important to also look to the future and to try and harness new technologies artistically as well.
No, absolutely. I agree entirely. I have got one question I have to ask. I mean, obviously, you've done really good job as well of capturing the likeness of many of the actors, stroke filmmakers that you cover throughout this. Who was the most difficult person to draw?
Well, I think the one that I never even managed to get right was Guy Pearce.
You got the memento bits.
Yeah, I'm not satisfied with that drawing. I don't know what's wrong with me.
We've made him very well, mind you. He is quite lean, isn't he?
He's very lean in that film. Yeah. I think he just needs to be seen in 3D in real life. I don't know, but there's something I couldn't. Like I just tried and I couldn't get that. I would love to go back. Like that.
Well, put it this way, I knew who it was. So, but then again, it's very iconic, of course.
It's in the context. I mean, I think it's. I tried my best with the likenesses. So I don't know. It's not. I mean, it's pretty important, but it's not the most important thing to me to get the likeness spot on.
Oh no, not at all. But you have. I mean, it's just by flicking through it without even reading it. You can pick up on the film references and who they are and things of that ilk very well. So yeah.
See, the reason that I feature in it is that's the one thing I know I can draw. The one thing I know I can draw is myself. So that's when stuck, I stick my head on top of the character,
like you did for Marty McFly.
Yeah.
And Indiana Jones.
and Yoda, yeah.
I especially like your Yoda.
That's one of my favorites, and the most fun probably to draw was me as Brundlefly.
Oh right.
Because I could just go full like horror.
Yes, Brundlefly. That's brilliant. Hopefully people listening to this will go out and buy a copy.
I hope so.
Would be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's had a really good response from those who've read it. It's been really nice to hear from people who've read it and going to comic conventions and so forth. People who are into film, I think, really like seeing this kind of stuff, and it was kind of done for that audience to be able to kind of enjoy their films, and also like even people who know this stuff already really enjoyed it, like who know the film theory. Like I never wrote it to be a hard introduction, like to be like this is here to educate you. Yeah, it's really here to entertain you. So like even if you know your film theory, I think you should get something out of it.
It does both, and much like film, I always think that's the best kind when it can, both entertain and educate all in one go. I think that's really good. Can I ask? I mean, do you still have any aspirations to make films?
Maybe I mean I think I probably would enjoy it. I think it's just the reason I kind of swayed over to comics was that it was just so accessible. Like it was so easy to pick up a pen and start drawing, compared with filmmaking where there's such a sort of a huge run-in time to get things done. I actually did make films as a teenager with my friends, so I've kind of got the experience, and I feel like I'm quite adept. I still actually do filmmaking sort of professionally. but never my own stories, never my own ideas. So I've got the skills. It's just like, it's almost just like having the idea of what you want to dedicate your time to. The passion kind of just ended up going over to comics, and when you've got the passion for something, it makes such a difference. And that was what I'd found back then was that I didn't have the passion to be working on the films I was working on. I had the passion to be working on the comics I was working on, and that's why that kind of took over. But I think my kind of on the back burner ambition is to make a horror, like a horror short. At the moment, that would be something kind of cool to get around to doing, because I think that'd be really fun, playing around with gloopy blood effects and stuff.
Cool.
I mean, it's amazing what you can do now with these digital SLRs and even with iPhones. I mean, I've shot with them a lot, and I've always been quite impressed with the footage I get from it, because if you put it in with other footage, nobody can tell.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I've got access to the equipment and everything. It's literally the ideas. It's like, but I mean, that's one thing that I talk about in Filmish, is like, what's amazing in the last few years is just the sheer accessibility of filmmaking. That's not like access to the equipment. Well, some people, a lot of people aren't going to have access to the equipment, but access to the equipment is probably no longer, if you really want to do it, is no longer the issue.
It's not a barrier. No,
it's not a barrier.
It's not a barrier anymore. No.
Most people have smartphones, even so. Even then, you could make a film. It might be a bit ropey, but like, that's not the barrier. Is actually doing it. Like, is having that drive and that interest to do it. So one day.
No, I agree. I've got another. It's a bit boring because it's a processy question, but we had a storyboard artist on a few podcasts ago, and I asked him the same question. I'm just curious. Do you? I mean, in terms of your drawing, do you do really old school and use pen and paper, or are you kind of a tablet and stylus sort of guy? I mean, how do you work nowadays in this modern era that we're in?
Age. Yeah, I work digitally entirely. Well, not entirely. So once it's written, the one bit of pencil and paper that I do is I draw tiny little thumbnails. So I'll draw sort of the size of a playing card. That'll be the page. So I'll draw these tiny little boxes with tiny little scribbled out figures in them, just to work out the sort of the rough composition and the order of the panels and the layout and everything. That's the only stage I do on paper, and then I work digitally. I just work in Photoshop with a Wacom tablet. Okay. I found that, like, I used to actually draw on paper. The first few self-published issues of Filmish I did were all on paper, and then I found that I started making more and more corrections in Photoshop, and then by the third issue I drew half the panels in Photoshop, and then by the fourth issue I drew it all in Photoshop, and then the book's all in Photoshop as well. The kind of one of the reasons is just that I personally find it a lot faster. There's a lot less faffing around, and if you make a mistake, or if you want to compose your panels at all, it's so easy, certainly early on when you're just doing the digital equivalent of a pencil drawing. It's so easy to just pick something up and move it or resize it, and so I just find that so valuable for
it's more malleable and more shareable and things of that nature, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like all digital technology now, it just gives you that bit more control and allows you to share and things around that. So that's cool. Can I also ask, I mean, you touched on it very briefly there. Can you talk a little bit about the whole self-publishing side of things?
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting, because I think it relates a bit to filmmakers as well now. So yeah, the self-publishing thing was when I started out, I was drawing the issues of Filmish, and then packaging them together in a PDF and sending it off to a printer. The first ones I did were just done off of a booklet photocopier, and then from there you have to, you're doing it all yourself, so you have to like publicize it yourself and get it into shops yourself. And like it's really rewarding. Like it's a really good way to start, because you're learning a lot as you go, and you can make mistakes as you go. You're getting things into shops and selling them to people early on. Like the first issue of Filmish I only printed 100 copies for that very first run, and getting them into shops and selling them was just really rewarding, and they sold quite quickly, so I could then afford to print another 100 and so forth. It builds from there. But with comics, with graphic novels and comics, what's really interesting is that that's actually, like, maybe compared to like literature, comics, the comics are actually that's the backbone of like comics creation, is people self-publishing. Although the sort of most obvious side is like the DC and Marvel, and then the independent publishers who are doing non-superhero stuff, there's actually for every one of those comics, there's probably 10 self-published comics out there. And the quality is, you wouldn't be, I mean, although you might choose to print it on a booklet printer or something, it is actually possible to get completely professional levels of quality from that self-publishing. And it's led to like a huge explosion in the number of comic creators out there. And and again, the accessibility is really good. So it means that people with really interesting voices and alternative voices to the mainstream are getting their work out there and getting them to an audience. It's really exciting to see that at the moment. And I think that might compare, I mean, I don't know well enough the sort of the independent or the out of, the non-cinema based movies or short movies scene. But I imagine there's maybe something similar going on with the sort of proliferation of creation, where people are much more able to create stuff and get it out there, via YouTube or whatever other outlets. That said, although there's a lot more people being able to create, obviously there's still not very much money to be made.
It's always the problem. Yeah.
So people are, a lot of people are doing it as a hobby, and even the people who are doing it professionally are probably not making very much money. But in terms of just sort of pure artistic enjoyment, just purely in artistic terms, it's amazing to be able to get your work out there that easily now. And I think that's, as I say, that's actually always been at the heart of what comics are, because you've obviously got, going back to like the countercultural comics of the 1960s and 70s, like Robert Crumb, they were zines, they were photocopied or cheaply printed, kind of fairly disposable things. So that's really at the heart of comics culture, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, just sort of talking about the way films are at the moment. I mean, it's I think that's the problem is sort of making money off these projects now, because you can put it on YouTube and you can put it on places like Vimeo and stuff, but I think as soon as you put it on the internet, people don't want to pay for it. It's that whole attitude that because it's on the internet it should be free, but yet people are quite willing to go to the cinema and pay £10 or £15 or whatever the price of a ticket is to go and see a film there. But if it's online, they just don't want to pay. It's that thing where I love what I do. I love making films, but I also love to make a living off it. And that's the thing I'm finding difficult at the moment, is trying to make a living off it. And and hopefully things will change, but it's sort of just getting past that that idea that that everything on the internet should be free.
I think I thought so the sort of the positive cases within comics, and I don't know if there's a kind of maybe a very mildly different attitude with comics, but I do know that maybe less so since the recession, but before the recession there were people who, and I do know people who do make a living off of comics, and not only just making a living off of comics, but what I mean by that is putting their comics online for free. But they're putting out something every day or 2 days or every week, and they've got a very dedicated audience who will then buy, a T-shirt design that they make, or a hard copy of the comic when it comes out, or some sort of merchandise, and that's how they kind of finance doing the comics every day, because they've got this really dedicated audience who will ultimately pay for things. Maybe they're not paying for the comic, but they're paying for merchandise because they love the comic.
Yeah, it's very much like the music industry.
Yeah.
At the moment, they don't make money off the albums; they make money off the tour, and they make money off the merchandising.
It's very strange, and it's it's obviously a real shame. But I can also see, like, I'm as guilty as anyone of being the same, like feeling like. So, for example, you get like like Patreon or Kickstarters, and like, you go, oh, that would be really nice to do, but I'm not sure I want to put down £2 a month or whatever, or put down, like, it is, you can't do it for everyone, and then you feel kind of a bit like, I think people, I don't know, there's partly a psychological thing about feeling like, yeah, you're due it for free, and partly because of that and because of the cost of other things, it's like, oh, well, because I can get this for free, and because I'm not got all that much money, I'm not gonna pay for it. Like, I'd love to pay for it, but I'm not gonna pay for it. I know, like, everyone does that, and in the end, it is kind of destructive towards these things, because it creates these really kind of untenable situations for individuals. And I guess the unfortunate thing is that although it creates untenable situations for individuals, there's just enough people coming through the kind of the grinder of creatives that for every person who gets ground out by the process, or sort of worn down and no longer able to afford to do what they love to do, there's a new person who's come along with something to take their place. And so there's the content is kind of unending. I think there's a growing movement with illustrators and comic artists of like really starting to properly demand favor pay, and to kind of really look carefully at how they give away stuff for free, and to sort of stop giving away work for free. I think that's a slightly different matter. But sometimes ironically, sometimes you can't afford not to work for free. Sometimes people feel like, I'm not going to get anywhere if I don't work for free. I'll work for free this time, But it's no, that's no good. Like, it's only once you're in a comfortable position that you can start to turn down work. You know what I mean? So people end up working for, 4 days for £50 or something like that, because that's what the client offered, was £50 to do whatever.
Yeah, it's the same with any creative endeavor, isn't it? Sadly, it's the arts is just hard to make money until you get in there, and then once you're established, then life changes. But it's crossing that barrier is the difficult bit, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
There could well be ways around it in the long term. I don't know if people start changing their minds. I think if there was kind of a really simpler way to, like, there was talk a while ago, and I don't know if it certainly hasn't become sort of global as a thing you see, but like, this idea that you could just, when you're browsing, just click a button and that sends like a few, even a few pence, 50 pence someone's way because you liked what they read, but without, in a way that was like, you wouldn't need to sign in and like go through this whole process every single time you wanted to do that. I wonder if that would make a difference or not. It's hard to tell. I don't think there's much evidence that it does, but it could in time if people start to kind of change their outlook on these things.
Yeah. Well, we have the other big problem is the explosion of content that's out there, and that's growing exponentially as well. I mean, that's one of those things we can't do anything about. It's just the way as time moves on, that's the way it is. But a quick question for you on with regards to release of this. I mean, obviously, as I already mentioned, I went into I know you can get it online, but I went into a local store and actually picked up a hard copy of this. And myself and Simon were often talking about, how with Blu-rays and stuff, we kind of like having the physical medium, the sort of collector's medium, as it were. But is your graphic novel also available as a digital graphic novel, or is it only a hard copy printed edition?
It's only Yeah, it's only a hard copy edition available.
Good for you.
I think that the publisher's strategy is to like release a digital edition maybe a couple of years down the line, which I think is quite smart. Like it gives you, there's a window where that's the hard copy is the exclusive way to get it, and then maybe once sales are tapering off a bit, then that's an opportunity to kind of re-engage people in a new medium. Yeah, like I really like I obviously really like the hard copy. I think it's sad when it's like, especially with comics actually, because there's something really like I don't find very appealing about reading comics on like a Kindle or something. I don't actually really mind reading them on a screen, but I still much prefer to read it as a hard copy. I think that's really so much part of the pleasure of it. And then also comics as a medium, there's something about like reading it, the way you can consume it. Like there's in Filmish, like there's some page spreads where you open it up and it's like the backyard scene from Rear Window or A Trip to the Moon, the moon head sort of over the 2-page spread. So I wanted to do things that really would be really nice to see in a physical form, because you're holding the book in front of you and you can see it laid out before you. So I don't know how that's going to translate when they do the digital edition. Like it won't necessarily translate perfectly, but I think, yeah, I mean, in terms of like, it's good for your listeners, it's good to know that because authors, due to things like Amazon and just general changes in the industry sort of crunching the amount of money made, like the best way to, if you do want to support someone and maybe you don't want to sign up to a Patreon or buy stuff online, but if someone does have a product for sale and you do want to buy it, like the best way to buy it is not through Amazon. Is like buying it from
orbitalcomics.com. orbitalcomics.com.
Yeah.
There you go. I got another plug-in for them.
Blimey, how big was this discount?
Actually, it wasn't
2%.
that big, but no.
Yeah, but like honestly, like supporting, so like if you can get it from the creator directly, if you can get it from a local book, like an independent bookshop, or yeah, like all these ways, like they actually do make a considerable difference. So it's definitely worth doing if you can.
That is the same for like filmmakers. If they've got a film on their site, then if you can buy a DVD copy off them or a Blu-ray copy, I mean that helps support them. Mm-hmm. It's a massive boost, because at the moment it is, for every film you watch on Netflix, the filmmaker doesn't see hardly anything from it. I mean, they see pennies.
Well, you know what I mean. Obviously, I'm an extreme case because I'm a massive film geek. But when I was watching, Jessica Jones and Daredevil at the weekend, I actually was in the back of my mind thinking, "Oh, I hope they release this on Blu-ray and that there's commentaries and deleted scenes and extras and documentaries and all this sort of thing." And obviously, I don't know. I don't think there's any plans for that at the moment, because obviously it's a Netflix property and they haven't gone in. They are by their very nature all about their streaming service.
I think you can get House of Cards on Blu-ray though.
Yeah. You can. That's very true. You can. Yes. But I think, I don't know whether they. In fact, I hope we're not entering an age where the extras start to disappear, because I must admit I am, one of my film school, very much apart from going to film school, but very much, from when. Oh God, I'm going to date myself now, but from when Laserdisc, which I never had, I skipped over Laserdisc, but I had friends that had Laserdiscs. When that first came out, and the whole notion of audio commentary while you were watching a film, I just found that fascinating, and I feel robbed now if I buy a Blu-ray and there's not a commentary on it. I'm always like, what the hell? Where's the commentary? But those other things like documentaries and deleted scenes and trailers and all that sort of thing, it's always good. We talk about that quite a lot on these podcasts, and I look at it the same as with buying. I have in front of me now, as we're speaking, your your graphic novel, and it's got a nice cover and a nice finish, and it's just nice to have in the rack, I think. So
well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
yes.
So Edward, what's the best place to what's your website?
So there's a website for Filmish, which is filmish.co.uk, and actually that's got like bonus features. What kind of I did, like, after the book was finished, I did sort of post some links. I mean, it's not extensive, but there's some links to some kind of cool stuff that I maybe looked at when I was making the book, or just otherwise thought was kind of cool. So there's some like links to videos and video essays and some articles, and from there also you can buy direct from me. You can buy copies of the book,
a signed copy. No,
you can buy signed copies, and I do a little sketch as well.
Oh, nice.
So that's like, obviously for me, that's like the best way. And you, as a thank you, you get a little drawing in the front of your book.
Cool.
So yeah, filmish.co.uk.
Excellent. And Keith, where can we find your work?
YouTube, if you go to British Eyles, that's EYLES, you can see for free some short films that I've made. And if you're interested in anything else that I've been involved in, then by all means put my name into IMDb, because I think I'm the only Keith Eyles on there currently.
And you can find my work, as always, on independentrunnings.com. You can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and all good podcast websites, downloaders, whatever's out there. We seem to be on it at the moment. And do follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Movie Heaven, Movie Hell. And if you're on iTunes or Stitcher, please leave us a review and a rating.
Yes, give us a review and spread the word, please. Do it.
So, Edward, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
No, it's been great to talk to you, and thank you for the good work on this.
We're just happy to spread the word. And but before we sign off, I have to say a big thank you to Claire Bueno, who introduced us to this book and also suggested that we should talk to Edward. So thank you for that, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. She's out there promoting the Ghostbusters documentary as we speak.
That's it, cleaning up the town. And so that just leaves me to say thank you for listening, and join us for the next episode of Movie Heaven, Movie Hell.